I had exactly 620, 418.77 in a trust distribution I'd never touched because my grandmother's executor insisted on wiring it straight into an irrevocable trust until my 33rd birthday. I was still in a sling from shoulder surgery, still foggy enough to misplace my phone twice a day, when my mother slid a cashier's check across her kitchen island and said, "Endorse it to your brother. Now." The mystery object was a sealed envelope, addressed to me in my grandmother's handwriting, one I'd never seen before, wedged under my mother's mail sorter like it had fallen there by accident. I didn't open it right away. I stared at the check, at my mother's calm smile, and at my stepfather's hand hovering near his phone like a reflex. Somewhere in the house, a camera light blinked green. I knew, even then, this would end with filings, exhibits, and a judge's signature, not a scream. Let me take you back. When my surgeon cleared me to drive again, I made the mistake of stopping at my mother Elise's place in Savannah, Georgia, because I'd been raised to confuse family with obligation. Her neighborhood was all manicured live oaks and tasteful wreaths, the kind of street where people smiled at you like they were practicing. I hadn't even sat down before she said, "We're handling something for Tyler." My brother, Tyler. 35. Charming in a way that made other people lean in. The kind of man who called our grandmother Nana and meant it when there was an audience. My stepfather Mark stood by the fridge in his golf pullover, not eating, not drinking, just watching me like he was waiting for a safe opening in traffic. Elise placed a single cupcake on the counter and lit a candle with a long match. "Happy birthday," she said, like she was reading it off a card she hadn't written. I didn't blow it out. I didn't make a wish. I just stood there, one hand supporting my sling, and waited for the real part to arrive. It did. She set a cashier's check down like it weighed something. The amount, 620, 418.77, was printed in tidy bank font, and my name was spelled correctly for once. "This is from Nana's trust," Elise said. "You're going to sign it over to Tyler." I looked at her. "That's not what Nana set up." "It's what's necessary," Mark said. His voice was soft, controlled. The kind of softness that had always meant there was a corner coming. Elise slid a pen closer. "He's in a situation. You have money sitting there. And you've always been the responsible one." There it was. The compliment that wasn't a compliment. The job assignment disguised as praise. I didn't reach for the pen. Mark moved behind me and, without drama, clicked the lock on the back door. Then he turned his phone toward me. A live camera feed. Our porch, my car in the driveway, a view from the street. I felt my stomach tighten, not because I believed in some hired muscle waiting outside, but because Mark was showing me how far he was willing to go to make me feel trapped. Elise spoke like she was offering a weather update. "If you don't help, Tyler loses everything." I set my good hand on the counter to steady myself. "Why would I endorse a cashier's check to Tyler? It's already made out to me." "Because your name is clean," Elise said. "And his isn't. The bank needs it to look simple." I stared at the check again. I work in compliance. Financial investigations, internal audits, the kind of work where you learn to listen to what people don't say. Elise wasn't asking me to help Tyler. She was asking me to lend him my identity for a transaction someone else didn't want traced. Mark leaned forward. "We don't have time for questions." Elise's eyes sharpened. "If you miss this, you lose everything." It was an odd line. Too absolute. Too rehearsed. Like she'd practiced saying it into a bathroom mirror until it sounded casual. I looked at the cupcake with its stubborn candle and felt a memory flash behind my eyes. 10 years old, same kitchen, my own birthday happening around me like a minor holiday no one observed. Tyler had gotten a new bike that year. I'd gotten a lecture about being grateful. I swallowed, slow. Panic makes people clumsy. My mother and stepfather were counting on me being clumsy. Explain the situation, I said, evenly. What exactly is Tyler in? Elise's jaw ticked. Debt, Mark added. It's not bad debt, it's… He stopped. He didn't have a sentence that sounded clean. What kind of debt? I asked. Elise's patience thinned. Why do you need to know? You're his sister. I let my eyes move, small details. Mark's phone, the lock. Elise's nails tapping near the pen, a staccato rhythm that betrayed her control. And, beneath her mail sorter, the corner of an envelope with my name on it in my grandmother's neat handwriting. That was the first discrepancy. The second was the check itself. Cashier's checks aren't how trustees distribute. Trustees wire. They document. They leave trails because they have to. A cashier's check felt like an attempt to convert something traceable into something portable. I kept my voice calm. Who issued the cashier's check? Elise said too fast. The bank. Which bank? I asked. Mark's eyes flicked to Elise, then away. Does it matter? It mattered. I exhaled, controlled. Here's what's going to happen if I endorse this to Tyler, I said, as if I were explaining a policy at work. If it's from a trust, there's a trustee, and there are distribution rules. If I circumvent that, the trustee can file for recovery. If the bank flags it, they file a report. And if Tyler's accounts are under any kind of lien or judgment, the funds get seized before he can use them. Elise stared like she didn't recognize the language. You're making it complicated. No, I said. You already made it complicated. You're just asking me to pretend it isn't. Mark finally stepped forward. We need you to do what we're asking, Maya. Hearing my name in his mouth always felt like a hand on the back of my neck. And if I don't? I asked. Elise didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Then I call emergency services and tell them you're not stable. You're on pain medication. You're agitated. You're making threats. I tell them you're a danger to yourself. The air went cold. Not dramatic. Just suddenly thin. I didn't move, but inside me something clicked into place. There are certain threats that tell you exactly who someone is. Elise's threat wasn't anger. It was strategy. I said quietly, You'd lie to get me put on a psychiatric hold. Elise shrugged like it was a tool, not a weapon. I'd do what I have to do to protect my son. Mark's eyes lowered, not out of shame, but out of calculation, like he was measuring the risk. I looked at the envelope again. My grandmother's handwriting. My name. My throat tightened, not with sentiment, but with the awareness that my grandmother had anticipated something. That envelope wasn't here by accident. Elise had it. Elise hadn't given it to me. My flaw has always been that I hesitate. I weigh. I want to be sure before I cut. It's a useful flaw in my job. It's a dangerous one in my family. I put the phone face down on the counter. Elise watched me. Good. I smiled a little, and I saw Elise misread it as surrender. Okay, I said. I'll help. But not like this. Mark's posture loosened, just a fraction. What do you mean? I picked up the pen, not to sign the check, but to buy time. If Tyler is in debt and you're trying to move money fast, doing it as a personal endorsement is the worst option. It's messy, it's suspicious, you'll trigger holds. The cleanest way is to route it through an entity with a legitimate purpose. Elise leaned in. An entity? An LLC, I said. A holding company. It creates a business rationale. It gives you an invoice, a paper trail that looks like a transaction instead of a rescue. Mark's eyes sharpened. Can you do that? I can set it up, I lied, smoothly. I do know how to form an LLC. Anyone can. That wasn't the lie. The lie was what I intended to do with it. Elise's candle flickered. She didn't notice. How fast? Tonight, I said. But you need to follow my steps exactly. Because if you don't, and you do something stupid, you'll expose Tyler and yourself. Mark swallowed. Do it. Elise pushed her laptop toward me like she'd been waiting for me to accept my role. I opened it, and the blue light washed over my face, hiding the way my mind was moving faster than my body. I didn't plan revenge in that moment. I planned containment, evidence, a record, a way to survive the next 10 minutes without being handcuffed in my own mother's driveway because she decided to weaponize a wellness check. Mark went to the den to fetch his laptop. Elise stayed, hovering, watching my hands. And that's when I slid the envelope from beneath the mail sorter as casually as I could manage with one working arm. Elise's hand snapped toward it. What's this? I asked, like I didn't already know. Elise's eyes went flat. Nothing. It had my name on it. My grandmother's handwriting. It wasn't nothing. I didn't argue. I just tucked it under my sling, out of sight, and kept my expression calm. Elise's nostrils flared. Focus. I said. Mark returned, breath slightly quick, like he'd been running without moving fast. He set his laptop down and glanced toward the window as if expecting consequences to materialize. Elise had trained him well. Fear first, questions later. I pulled up a state filing website and started typing, slowly because my shoulder ached and because moving too fast would invite scrutiny. Elise hovered. What are you doing? Forming an LLC, I said. If you want this to look legitimate, we need an operating agreement, and we need an invoice. We route Tyler's debt payoff through a corporate transaction so it reads like a purchase or settlement. Mark blinked. A settlement? That word is important, I said. Settlements have documentation. Elise nodded like she understood, though she didn't. She wanted a spell. I was giving her syllables. The second discrepancy revealed itself when Mark, shaking, slid a folder across the counter. Tyler's paperwork, he said. Inside were printed screenshots, Venmo requests, casino receipts, and, folded carefully, a demand letter from a law firm I recognized. Not because I'd dealt with them personally, but because I'd seen their letterhead in a fraud case last year. They didn't represent lenders. They represented people who collected. Elise tried to block my view with her hand. You don't need to read that. I do, I said. Mark's voice cracked. They said they'll garnish his wages. I looked up. Tyler has wages? Elise's eyes flashed. Maya. I flipped to the last page and saw something that made my mouth go dry. An account number listed as the repayment destination, with a note. Funds to be delivered via cashier's check or endorsed instrument. Not a wire, not a payment portal, an endorsed instrument. It wasn't a debt collection letter. It was a laundering request with nicer fonts. I kept my face neutral. Okay, I said. We can't endorse directly. We do an escrow step. Mark frowned. What's escrow? It's a neutral holding, I said. A third party holds the funds until conditions are met. Elise snapped. No third parties. I nodded slowly. Then you need to accept a delay, because anything else is risky. Elise's gaze burned into me. No delays, Mark whispered. We have until morning. There it was. The clock. The true pressure. I softened my voice like I was helping. Then we do it through a corporate settlement, and we document it enough to satisfy the bank if they ask. We also need a notary for the signature package. Elise looked relieved. We can do that. Mark rubbed his forehead. At night? Remote online notary, I said. It's legal in Georgia. It's a video appointment. They verify IDs. Elise said, do it. I pulled up a notary website. Not to book, not yet, but to show Elise something that looked official. The point wasn't the notary. The point was to get Elise and Mark on camera agreeing to structure a transaction based on false premises. Because if Elise ever called 911 and tried to paint me as unstable, I needed my own record. My calm voice, her threats, their coercion. And something more. That envelope under my sling. When the notary page loaded, Elise's phone buzzed. She looked, then pressed it face down quickly. "What?" I asked. "Nothing," she said, too quickly again. Mark's laptop chimed. A calendar reminder popped up. Telfair Museum Gala. Board chair arrival, 6:30 p.m. I glanced at Elise. She was on the museum board. Her identity was built on that role. The gala wasn't just an event, it was her stage. Elise noticed my eyes on the screen and snapped the laptop shut. I didn't comment. I just waited, and I filed it away. That night, I drove home with the envelope wedged against my ribs under the sling like a secret pulse. The drive felt long because my body hurt, but my mind was steady in a way it hadn't been in years. In my apartment, I sat at my kitchen table and opened the envelope with my good hand, slow enough not to tear it. Inside was a single letter and a slim USB drive. My grandmother's letter began without softness. Maya. If you're reading this, it means Elise tried to intercept what was meant for you. I stared at the words until they blurred. The letter continued. I included a canary clause in the trust. If anyone attempts to coerce your signature, forge documents, or misrepresent your mental fitness to gain control of your distribution, the trustee is instructed to immediately freeze any discretionary benefits to Elise and Tyler, notify counsel, and release your distribution into a protected account. My chest tightened, not from grief, from recognition. My grandmother had seen my family clearly in a way I'd spent years refusing to. At the bottom of the letter was a name, Haskins and Rowe, Estate Council, and a line, Ask for Daniel. He will already know. The USB drive had a label, Inventory. I plugged it into my laptop. It contained 2 folders. The first was titled Trust Documents. The affidavit my grandmother had signed, the trust terms, and a note explaining the canary clause in plain language. The second folder was titled If They Try It. I clicked it. Inside were scans of canceled checks, copies of wire confirmations, and a spreadsheet of expenses tied to Elise and Tyler going back 10 years. Hotel charges, casino withdrawals, tuition payments that weren't mine, a pattern of siphoning. And then I saw one line item that made my stomach flip. $92,000. Museum pledge. Fulfilled using custodial account funds, originally set aside for Maya. They hadn't just taken from me emotionally, they'd taken from me financially, and they'd used it to build Elise's reputation. The second folder changed everything. I didn't sleep much, not because I was spiraling, because once you see the mechanism of harm, you stop mourning the fantasy of what you thought it was. At 8:03 a.m., I called Haskins and Rowe. A receptionist answered. Haskins and Rowe. My name is Maya Rios, I said. My grandmother is Estella Rios. The letter says, Ask for Daniel. There was a pause, a soft click, and then a man came on the line. Maya, he said gently. I'm Daniel Haskins. His voice held something I didn't expect, relief. You knew I'd call, I said. I hoped you wouldn't need to, he replied. But yes. I sat down, careful with my shoulder. My mother has a cashier's check from the trust. She tried to force me to endorse it to my brother. Daniel went quiet for half a beat, the kind of silence where someone is choosing their next sentence carefully. Did she threaten you? He asked. Yes, I said. She threatened to call emergency services and claim I'm mentally unstable if I didn't comply. Okay, he said, crisp now. Then the canary clause is triggered if we document it properly. Do you have the letter? I do. And the USB? Yes. He exhaled. Good. Maya, listen closely. I'm going to say a sentence, and I need you to hear it as advice, not drama. You are not going back to that house alone. I wasn't planning to, I said. Daniel's voice softened again. Your grandmother anticipated this. She left instructions because she trusted you to follow process, even when it hurts. I stared at the envelope on my table. What do I do first? First, Daniel said. We create a clean record. You write a factual timeline while it's fresh. Dates, exact quotes. Second, we notify the trustee. Third, we prepare an emergency motion if needed, temporary protective orders, and a petition to prevent your mother from interfering. I blinked. Protective order? Against my mother? Daniel didn't hesitate. If she threatened to file a false report to control you, yes, that's coercion. And if she tries it, it becomes evidence. My hand tightened around my phone. She's on the museum board. There's a gala tonight. Daniel's tone shifted slightly. The Telfair Gala? My eyes lifted. You know about it. Daniel said, Your grandmother funded part of that museum wing. Quietly. She asked me to keep a file. A small chill went through me. Why? Because your mother likes stages, Daniel said. And your grandmother believed the truth should be available where Elise values her image most. That was the first time I understood the kind of woman my grandmother had been. Not loud, not cruel, just prepared. I swallowed. I don't want to humiliate anyone. Daniel's response was immediate, gentle but firm. Then don't. You can pursue this privately. But if Elise escalates, if she makes a public move, you're allowed to meet her where she stands. I closed my eyes for a second. My shoulder throbbed. My mind stayed clear. This isn't revenge, I said, hearing my own voice steady. This is justice. Daniel was quiet for a beat, then said, Exactly. Now, do you have any recording of what happened last night? I thought of Elise's kitchen, the blinking green light. There might be, I said slowly. They have a doorbell camera. Daniel's voice sharpened. Perfect. That's the evidence twist we want. If we can access it legally, it gives us contemporaneous proof of coercion. How do I access it? I asked. Daniel said, Do you have shared access? Family account? I hesitated. I used to, years ago, but Elise... Check, he said. And don't attempt anything that violates access laws. If you have legitimate access, we pull it. If not, we subpoena it later. I opened the app on my phone. My hands were steady. I still had access. Elise never bothered to remove me because Elise never imagined I'd use it. The app showed last night's clips. There was audio. Elise's voice, clear as a bell, saying, Then I call emergency services and tell them you're not stable. Mark's voice. The lock clicking. The pressure. I saved the clip and emailed it to Daniel. 10 minutes later, he called back. That's strong, he said. Very strong. And Maya, one more thing. What? The cashier's check, he said. If it was issued improperly, we need to stop it from being negotiated. Do you know which bank? I remembered Elise's evasiveness. I'll find out, I said. Daniel paused. How? I looked at the museum gala reminder I'd glimpsed. Elise wouldn't answer direct questions, but she would answer a question wrapped in admiration. I'll ask her in front of someone she respects, I said. Daniel's tone held a faint warning. Careful. I will be, I said. I'm not going to yell. I'm going to document. That afternoon, I wrote my timeline. Exact quotes. Exact times. I included the cupcake, the lock, the check amount down to the cents. I attached the camera clip. Daniel prepared a trustee notification and drafted a short letter. A formal notice of coercion, referencing the canary clause, requesting immediate protective measures. Then he said, Maya, if your mother files a false report, you need to be ready. You should have someone with you tonight. I thought of the one person in my orbit who was calm under pressure. My coworker, Jada, who used to work security compliance before switching to internal audit. She wasn't sentimental. She was precise. I called her. She listened without interrupting, then said, I'm wearing flats. Where are we going? By 6:40 p.m., Jada and I were walking into the museum gala under warm lights and polite music that made everything feel safe. even when it wasn't. Elise loved this event because it looked like philanthropy and felt like control. She spotted me almost immediately. Her smile appeared, perfect and shallow. She approached with 2 board members trailing behind her like accessories. "Maya," she said brightly, "you made it. I didn't think you'd feel up to it." Her emphasis on feel was small, but it was there. A reminder. A threat dressed as concern. I nodded, calm. "I feel fine." Elise's eyes flicked to my sling. "Poor thing, still on medication?" Jada stepped closer, casual. "Hi, I'm Jada, Maya's friend." Elise smiled at Jada. "Lovely. Maya, can we talk?" "In a minute," I said. "I have a quick question first. The cashier's check you brought yesterday. What bank issued it?" Elise's smile held, but her eyes tightened. "Why?" I tilted my head slightly, innocent. "Daniel Haskins asked. He wants to make sure it's documented correctly." Elise froze for half a second. The name landed like a stone in her stomach. "Why are you talking to Daniel?" she asked, voice still pleasant, just a shade sharper. "Because Nana told me to," I said simply. Elise's mouth opened and closed once. One of the board members, an older woman with pearls, leaned in. "Daniel Haskins, Estella's attorney? He's been around forever." Elise recovered quickly. "Oh, yes, Daniel. He's helpful." I looked at Elise and smiled slightly. "Right. So which bank issued the check?" Elise's gaze flicked around, people watching, donors nearby, her stage. She couldn't refuse without looking strange. "Coastal Heritage," she said tightly. "Thank you," I replied. Elise leaned closer, voice low. "We will talk. Now." Jada's hand brushed my elbow, steadying. Elise saw it and didn't like it. Elise guided me toward a quieter hallway, her hand hovering near my sling like she might grab it if she needed to steer me harder. When we were out of earshot, her pleasant mask dropped. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "I'm attending a gala," I said. "You invited half the city. It would have been rude not to come." Elise's eyes flashed. "Don't play." I kept my tone even. "You threatened to call emergency services on me." Elise's lips pressed together. "I was trying to protect Tyler." "No," I said. "You were trying to control me." Elise leaned in close, her voice a careful whisper. "If you don't fix this, Maya, I'll make sure everyone knows you're unstable. Your job, your reputation." I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt no urge to argue. Arguing with Elise was always like punching fog. It satisfied her because it meant I was still emotionally engaged. Instead, I said, "I have the doorbell recording." Elise's face went still. "I also have Nana's letter," I added, "the one you hid." Elise stared, and in her eyes I saw something that wasn't anger. It was fear of losing control of narrative. "You have no idea what you're doing," she whispered. "I do," I said. "I do this for a living, Mom. You just never cared enough to listen." Her hand lifted as if to reach for my phone, my sling, anything. Jada stepped in quietly. "Elise, don't." Elise snapped her gaze to Jada. "This is family." Jada's voice stayed calm. "So is coercion." Elise's eyes narrowed and she looked back at me like she was recalculating. "Tyler will be ruined," she said. "He will be—" "Elise!" A man's voice called from behind us, warm and authoritative. "There you are." We turned. A man in a dark suit approached. Silver hair, a familiar face from local news coverage about charitable gifts. Elise's posture changed instantly. Her smile returned like a switch. "Mr. Caldwell," she said brightly. "Wonderful to see you." I recognized him. Emmett Caldwell, a major donor. He'd funded half this gala. He was the kind of person Elise collected like jewelry. He looked at me. "And you must be Maya, Estella's granddaughter." My throat tightened. "Yes." His eyes softened. Your grandmother was formidable. Elise's smile trembled at the edges. Mr. Caldwell glanced between us and said gently, "Daniel asked me to say hello if I saw you." Elise's face drained of color so fast it looked like a lighting change. I blinked. "Daniel did?" Caldwell nodded. "He said you might need a quiet room if things got complicated." Elise's voice sharpened. "Daniel has no business." Caldwell's expression remained polite, but the warmth cooled. "Elise, Daniel has every business where Estella's trust is concerned." Elise's mouth tightened. "Of course." Caldwell turned to me. "Maya, would you like to step into the board office for a moment? I think Daniel left something there." Elise snapped. "No." Caldwell looked at her, calm. "Yes." Allie identity twist, delivered without fireworks. Emmett Caldwell wasn't Elise's ally. He was my grandmother's. Elise couldn't fight him in public. Not here, not on her stage. In the board office, Caldwell closed the door and handed me a slim folder with a sticky note. "For tonight, if needed." Inside was a printed copy of the Canary Clause, a list of the museum's major donors, Estella's contributions highlighted, and a letter addressed to the museum board about ethics and fiduciary responsibility. My heart beat once, heavy. Caldwell watched me read. "Estella didn't like bullies," he said quietly. I swallowed. "I didn't know." "She didn't advertise her kindness," he replied. "She just aimed it." My phone buzzed, a notification, Ring camera, live view activated. Someone had opened the app. I looked at Jada. She leaned over my shoulder. "Your mother's trying to access your footage." I opened the app. My access still worked, but Elise was now also active. Jada said quietly, "We need to lock this down." I thought of Daniel's voice. "Don't violate access laws." This was a shared account I'd been granted, and Elise was now actively trying to erase the clip. I did the only thing that mattered. I sent the clip to a cloud backup I controlled, then forwarded it to Daniel again with a timestamp. Then I waited. When we returned to the gala floor, Elise was smiling too hard. She approached like a wave, pretty on top, dangerous underneath. "Maya," she said, "let's go home. You're tired." "I'm not," I said. Elise's eyes cut to Jada. "You're not needed." Jada didn't move. Elise lowered her voice. "Maya, if you do this here, I swear." "You'll do what?" I asked calmly. "Call 911? In a building full of witnesses?" Elise's throat tightened. She didn't answer. The music swelled, and a host tapped a microphone on stage, calling for attention. A screen behind the podium displayed the museum's logo. Elise blinked once, realizing what was happening, the portion of the evening where board leadership made remarks, where she would be seen, where she would be recorded. She moved toward the stage, then looked back at me with a warning in her eyes. I followed, not rushing. I wasn't chasing her. I was letting her walk into the light. Elise stepped up to the podium, radiant, practiced. "Good evening," she began, voice warm. "We're so grateful." I stood near the AV booth and caught the technician's attention with a small wave. Caldwell had already spoken to him. The technician nodded once, subtle. Elise continued her speech, thanking donors, praising community, wearing her integrity like a gown. I waited until she finished and the applause began. Then Caldwell rose from his table, and the room quieted in anticipation of his remarks. He walked to the podium with measured steps, his voice calm. "I'd like to thank Elise for her leadership," he said, and Elise smiled, relieved. "And I'd like to honor Estella Rios, whose quiet generosity helped build the education wing you're standing in." Polite applause. Caldwell's eyes moved to me briefly, permission without pressure. He continued. "Estella believed philanthropy should be clean, that fiduciary duty matters, that family ties do not excuse financial misconduct." The room shifted. Elise's smile stiffened. Caldwell turned slightly toward the screen. I'm going to ask the museum's counsel, who is present tonight, to note the following for the record. A murmur rippled. Elise's eyes widened a fraction. Museum counsel? Record? Caldwell's voice stayed steady. An ethics notice has been submitted to the board. It concerns a potential misuse of funds connected to a custodial account and a trust distribution. Elise's breath caught. She stepped toward the podium, a little too fast. Caldwell raised one hand, not dramatic, just a gentle stop. Elise, please. Her face tightened. This is not appropriate. Caldwell looked at her, calm. It's appropriate if it's true. Elise's gaze snapped to me, sharp as glass. I stepped forward and took the microphone, and the room went quiet in a way that felt physical. My voice didn't shake. My name is Maya Rios, I said. I'm Estela Rios's granddaughter. Elise whispered from behind me. Don't. I didn't look at her. I'm not here to embarrass anyone, I continued. I'm here because I was coerced yesterday into endorsing a trust distribution check. $620,418.77 to my brother. When I refused, my mother threatened to call emergency services and claim I was mentally unstable to force my compliance. There was a collective inhale, not outrage, shock. Elise hissed, Maya, you're... I held up my phone slightly. I have the recorded clip from the doorbell camera, time-stamped, and I've submitted it to counsel. The AV technician on Caldwell's cue switched the screen. Not the video. Daniel advised restraint. Not yet. Instead, a single slide appeared, a screenshot of the trust's canary clause, with the key sentence highlighted. Any attempt to coerce the beneficiary's signature or misrepresent mental fitness triggers immediate protective action and notification to counsel. A legal clause twist displayed without theatrics, just text in a big font. The room turned colder. Elise's voice came out thin. This is a misunderstanding. I kept my tone even. If it is, the court can clarify, but the process begins now. A man in a dark suit stood from the side aisle and approached. Museum counsel, apparently, who nodded once to me and then addressed the room. Due to an ethics notice received this afternoon, he said, the board will convene an emergency session. Ms. Harrow's remarks will conclude for the evening. Elise's face went pale with rage and panic. She tried to smile, tried to keep her role, but the room had shifted. People weren't applauding. They were watching. Elise leaned toward me, barely moving her lips. You just destroyed us. I turned my head slightly, calm. You destroyed yourself yesterday when you threatened me. Elise's eyes filled, not with tears, with fury. And then she did exactly what she always did when she felt cornered. She reached for her phone. I watched her thumb move, and I knew. She was going to call. She was going to try anyway. Jada stepped closer and said quietly, Don't. Elise glared. I can... Caldwell's voice cut in, gentle but iron. Elise, if you place that call, you're doing it in a room full of witnesses, including counsel. Consider your next move carefully. Elise's hand froze. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just stepped off the stage and walked toward the exit with Jada at my side, my phone in my hand, my posture steady. Behind me, Elise stood in the light she'd always craved, and for once it showed what she really was. Not a pillar, not a protector, someone who'd been using institutions and family as props. Outside, the night air was humid and soft. My shoulder ached. My stomach felt hollow, but my mind was clear. Daniel called me as I reached my car. Maya, he said, I got your second email. The clip is preserved. Good. I didn't play it, I said. I know, Daniel replied. That was wise. Now we take this to the system. The next morning, Daniel filed a petition with the probate court, attaching my timeline, the recorded clip, the letter from my grandmother, and a request for immediate relief, an order preventing Elise from interfering with my funds, and a temporary protective order based on coercion and threatened false reporting. Coastal Heritage Bank was notified of potential improper negotiation of a cashier's check. The trustee was notified that the canary clause had been triggered. And then, Elise escalated anyway. At 2:17 p.m., 2 officers knocked on my apartment door for a wellness check. I opened it calmly, Jada behind me, my phone recording openly. One officer spoke gently. "Ma'am, we received a call from your mother. She said you're recovering from surgery," I finished, "and in active contact with counsel. Here is the recorded evidence of her threat to do this." I handed over a printed statement Daniel had prepared, with his letterhead at the top and his number at the bottom. The officer read it, his expression shifting from neutral to wary. "I also have my medical discharge paperwork," I said, "and a witness." Jada nodded. "She's fine. She's been fine." The officer asked a few questions. My answers were calm, consistent. He looked at my apartment. Clean, quiet. No chaos. He lowered his voice. "Ma'am, do you feel safe?" I held his gaze. "Not from my mother." He nodded once, like he understood more than he could say. "We'll note that." When they left, I sat on my couch and let myself breathe for the first time in 2 days. Elise had played her card. It failed. And now it was documented. 2 weeks later, we were in probate court. Elise arrived with Mark and Tyler. Tyler wore a suit that didn't fit quite right, hair perfectly styled, eyes scanning the room like he was looking for sympathy he could harvest. When Tyler saw my sling, he tilted his head and said quietly, "Dramatic as always." I didn't respond. Daniel sat beside me with a file box, neat, tabbed, labeled. His calm presence felt like scaffolding. Elise's attorney argued that I was confused, that I was medically compromised, that Elise was only trying to protect family assets. Daniel didn't argue with adjectives. He argued with documents. He introduced the trust language, the canary clause, the letter in my grandmother's handwriting, the timeline, the clip. He played 30 seconds of Elise's recorded threat, just enough. Elise's voice filled the courtroom. Then, I call emergency services and tell them you're not stable. Elise's face twisted, and for the first time, I saw her realize what she'd done. She'd created a record. She'd given me something that didn't rely on anyone believing my feelings. It relied on her own words. The judge watched Elise carefully. Daniel then introduced the bank notice, Coastal Heritage confirming the cashier's check had been requested under circumstances inconsistent with standard trustee distribution. The judge's eyebrows rose slightly at that. Finally, Daniel introduced the last piece, the metadata. He explained it simply, because legal power is clarity. "The demand letter requesting an endorsed instrument," Daniel said, "was produced on Mark Harrow's office printer. We know this because the PDF's embedded metadata identifies the device ID and user profile. Additionally, the document was created after the alleged debt deadline printed on the letter. In other words, it was backdated." Elise's attorney objected. The judge allowed it as preliminary evidence pending verification, noting Daniel's offer to provide a forensic affidavit. The courtroom went silent. Because the story Elise wanted to tell, that she was a mother trying to save her son, collapsed under one small, unglamorous fact. They'd fabricated paperwork. The judge issued a temporary order that day. My funds were to remain under trustee protection with immediate release into a safeguarded account in my name, and Elise and Mark were ordered not to contact me except through counsel. A temporary protective order was granted. Elise's attempt to trigger emergency services was noted in the record. Outside the courtroom, Elise hissed, "You're going to regret this." I looked at her, calm. "I regret waiting so long to believe you." Tyler stepped forward, smile slick. "Come on, Maya. We're family. You can still fix this. Daniel's gaze cut toward Tyler, sharp and quiet. Mr. Harrow, any further attempts to contact my client will be included in our request for a longer order. Tyler's smile faded. Then Mark did something I didn't expect. He looked at Elise, not at me, and said under his breath, "This is your fault." Elise snapped, "Don't!" Mark's voice trembled. "You told me she'd fold." Elise glared at him like he'd betrayed her in public, because he had. That was the moment I understood Mark's role all these years. Not mastermind, not victim, an accomplice who relied on Elise's certainty to excuse his cowardice. The museum board met the following week. Caldwell attended, along with counsel. Elise was asked to step down, pending investigation. Her replacement was announced in a calm email with corporate language that didn't mention my name. It didn't need to. Everyone understood. Then the museum did something else, quietly. They commissioned an independent financial review of donations and custodial funds tied to Elise's tenure. That review found the custodial account discrepancy, the one my grandmother had tracked, and flagged it to authorities as potential misuse. Elise didn't get marched out of her house. She didn't get shouted at on the street. She got something she couldn't charm her way out of: paperwork. A month later, Daniel called me. "We have a referral," he said. "The DA's office is reviewing potential fraud and forgery related to the backdated demand letter and attempted negotiation of trust funds. The bank's compliance department is cooperating." I sat at my table, my sling finally off, my shoulder still stiff. "What happens now?" "Now," Daniel said. "We let the process move." "What about Tyler?" I asked. Daniel's pause was measured. "Tyler's situation is complicated. He has civil judgments. There may be tax issues. If he was part of the fabrication, he's exposed." I thought of Tyler's smile in the hallway. "He'll say he didn't know." "Then we'll show what he did know," Daniel replied. "That's what evidence is for." 2 weeks after that, Tyler tried one more move. He showed up at my apartment lobby with a bouquet of flowers, like we were in a movie that forgave men for being charming. The doorman called up. "There's someone here for you." I checked the camera feed from my phone. Tyler looked up at the lens and waved. I didn't go downstairs. I called Daniel instead. Daniel said, "We file a notice of violation. We extend the protective order request." Tyler texted me a minute later. "You really want Mom to go down for this?" I stared at the words until they felt empty. Then I wrote back, "I want her to stop." That was the difference between us. Tyler wanted outcomes. I wanted boundaries. The court extended the order. Tyler was instructed not to contact me. The trustee released my distribution into a protected account under my sole control, as the Canary Clause directed, and Elise, stripped of private leverage, tried to rebuild her power through public narrative, telling friends I was unwell, that I was manipulated, that I was vindictive. But her narrative couldn't outrun the fact that she'd attempted to weaponize a wellness check and had been formally restrained by a judge. In Savannah, reputations aren't destroyed by one accusation. They erode by a pattern people can't unsee. 3 months later, I received a thin envelope from Haskins & Rowe. Inside was a notice. Elise had agreed, through counsel, to a civil settlement acknowledging improper interference with my trust distribution. No admission of guilt in the language. Those words are slippery. But the terms were clear. No contact, no claims against my trust, no attempts to file conservatorship petitions, and reimbursement of legal fees. Mark signed too. Tyler didn't. He couldn't. He was busy dealing with his own consequences: wage garnishment orders, a tax lien, and a court-mandated repayment plan. None of it was dramatic. It was just arithmetic. And then, quietly, the museum announced a new ethics policy for board members, including stricter financial disclosures and conflict checks. Caldwell's name was on the committee. Elise's name wasn't. 1 year later, I moved into a small brick house with a porch that faced the morning sun. Not a mansion, not a statement. Just mine. I started a compliance consulting practice, small at first, then steady, helping nonprofits tighten controls so charismatic people couldn't turn goodwill into a personal credit line. On my kitchen shelf, I kept my grandmother's letter in a simple frame, not for sentiment, for clarity. Elise didn't vanish. She still lived in the same city, but she lived without access to me and without the stage she'd used to make herself look untouchable. Mark and Tyler drifted, two men who'd built their lives around Elise's gravity, now moving without orbit. Sometimes I'd see a headline about a museum fundraiser or a board reshuffle, and I'd feel a small, quiet relief. Not triumph. Relief. Because the system had done what it's supposed to do when you bring it clean evidence. It created distance. I still don't tell people everything. Not because I'm ashamed, but because I've learned that privacy is a form of safety. But I'll say this. If you're waiting for a toxic family member to suddenly understand your worth, you can wait forever. The lesson isn't to win their love. The lesson is to stop negotiating your life with people who only see you as a resource. If you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and keeping yourself, what did you choose, and what did it cost you? And if you want more stories where justice comes from receipts, filings, and quiet power, subscribe. I'll be here.